Lots of crazy news happening right now, and it's very difficult to stay on top of it. But that's why in this video, I will be telling you the latest information about what is happening socially and politically, while Tim Picciott will be telling you everything that's happening economically. And it's very interesting to also see the Fed not updating their balance sheet, but we're going to get into that in just a little bit. But first, let's get into what is happening politically. As, of course, we have politicians on the national stage coughing into podiums and microphones and then sharing it with other politicians that are that don't really give us a lot of confidence, and we'll tell you why we're not really confident in a lot of the responses that have been happening. But obviously, a lot of people are quarantining. A lot of countries are shutting down. The French government has just shut down cinemas, restaurants nationwide. Spain is also on lockdown. Many countries all over the world are making many significant moves to try to stop the spread of this coronavirus. The United States is expanding its travel ban, especially in Europe, now extending it to the United Kingdom and Ireland that have a very high degree of infections, even though Donald Trump said that they were fighting the coronavirus very well, which there wasn't any data for. But this is something that you really should be looking out for. And this next article is from BuzzFeed that was able to obtain documents from the Department of Health and Human Services that was given out specifically to intelligence community members for their recommendations on what they should do. And it's very interesting that they were given recommendations to have enough food for 12 weeks. Tim, if you can, scroll down that BuzzFeed article. You can actually see some of the documents. But they're told to stockpile masks. Meanwhile, the Surgeon General tells you specifically, masks don't work, don't stockpile on them. The official notices is that, have a little bit of food, but don't go panic shopping. Meanwhile, they're telling their government workers, intelligence community to stock up for food for at least 12 weeks. 3 months. That is a very significant time. But obviously, they're releasing these documents because they don't want anyone else to panic. But as we've been telling you, it's important to prepare. If you do panic, a lot of people will just go to the stores and not have enough for everyone. So that's kind of the mentality here. But now we're getting a point of view of how actually serious this is, as the Pentagon even announced that they're going to be going on a complete lockdown, that are banning their officials from doing any domestic flights. And of course, they're also making a lot of dumb, idiotic moves, as Donald Trump and his administration, that, by the way, hasn't been doing really well with the testing kits. There's been a lot of disinformation about the testing. There's been a lack of testing. There's been just total lies by the government about the testing of this. The government can't get that right, but they're launching another military operation as we're speaking right now. I did a full video about this in great detail on the main channel, We Are Change, youtube.com/We Are Change on the main channel. But yeah, there's another major military operation underway in Iraq, which of course will be retaliated by Iranian forces, which will continue the spiral of just asinine American foreign policy that really shouldn't be prioritized right now. But that's what the White House, the Pentagon, is doing right now. There's also a huge 40,000 participant military drill called Defender Europe 2020, still planned and scheduled. Yes, the U.S. military, with 17 other NATO countries, are still planning a massive military exercise right on Russia's border as a way to virtual signal and saber rattle against Russia, so they could have their military operations together, which, again, isn't the best idea, especially with everything that's going on. Other information that we're getting is that Trump was just tested for the coronavirus. He is still waiting to get results, even though his own doctor allegedly says that he does not need one, even though there's documented report accounts of him meeting and being near infected people with the virus. So, again, the situation looks like it will only get much worse from here, as a woman who is 82 years of age just died in New York City from the coronavirus. And of course, cases are jumping, with many people warning that our medical system is unprepared for this larger influx. Meanwhile, China is reporting a recovery, but some Chinese whistleblowers and residents are claiming that is not true at all. What is certain is that there's a lot of uncertainty, and that this situation is still very hot. There's still a lot of things developing, and we will be doing our best to cover it. But just like this virus is a major issue, so are the larger economic ramifications, which many people think will be the real problem here. Tim, what are you seeing economically with the latest information that you're gathering?
Thanks, Luke. What we're seeing right now in the traditional markets has been a complete bloodbath. And what a lot of people are asking me right now, especially the retail everyday investors, are, is this over? Should we come in and buy? And for me, this is not the crisis that, that I've been preparing for the last several years. You did mention that the Federal Reserve's balance sheet was not updated. And for me, that is a gigantic deal. Every Thursday, they update this balance sheet. And what we see here is it says it was updated on the 12th. However, when you go over and take a look over here, it said it was March 4th was the last time they updated their balance sheet. And while we're on the balance sheet, you'll notice that it got up to $4.5 trillion. And we were told that this was going to get back down to zero. And what they were planning on doing, you see here, you see the balance sheet going down. So they started a program about 3 years ago where they started selling assets off the balance sheet. That culminated in October of 2018, where the Fed got up to $50 billion a month in asset sales. Now, I knew that could never happen. I had a video called The Perfect Storm is Brewing in May 2018 saying that all these things coming together, coalescing at once, would cause the interest rates to spike, which would then pop the stock market bubble, exactly what we ended up seeing. And then I knew that the Fed would then have to basically reverse course in everything they said. And what we're seeing today is the Fed went from saying we can sell $50 billion a month to then that got flipped into actually we need to stimulate $50 billion a day in the repo markets. And then that $50 billion a day, Luke, turned into, actually it's now $500 billion. And so the Fed put in $500 billion on Thursday, $500 billion on Friday, another $500 billion this upcoming Monday. And then there's other programs even on top of that. And so all told, we're looking at about $2 trillion of excess liquidity, not really saying excess, but additional liquidity that has been thrown into the system. Now we have the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, who has actually come out and said yesterday during the press conference that the Fed and Treasury are working to provide unlimited liquidity. So if everything is going great and we're just, conspiracy theorists over here talking about how, talking about all this stuff for the past several years, then why is the Fed having to launch this $500 billion a day program? To me, Luke, it means that everything is not going as well as what we've been told. And if you take a look at what the real crisis is, the real crisis is the fact that our money is debt. Behind me, you'll see it says King's Ransom. That is to signify the fact that this is not our money. This is the Crown's money. And the analogy that I like to use is imagine you have three people on an island and you've got a banker, you've got let's say a baker, and then a carpenter. So the carpenter wants to open up his own carpentry shop. So he goes to the banker to get out $100. That's the only $100 that exists on the island, but there's interest on it. So let's say it's a 1-year loan. So at the end of year one, let's say you owe $104, but $100 is all that exists on the island. That right there is our current financial system. When it was created December 23rd, 1913, there was 4% interest on the government debt. So the thing is, the money is debt. So it's not actual money. We have currency. The currency is backed by debt. This is an impossible situation, Luke, right from day one. And so essentially, this is high-tech economic slavery that we're living under. There's always going to be, and that's not hyperbole. That's not me exaggerating anything. I was in the class that won the national competition on the Federal Reserve against Harvard, Yale, MIT, all these big wigs. Our saying was actually called "In Fed We Trust," and I believed in the Fed. And the only reason I ever looked into all this stuff is because this guy told me that the Federal Reserve is private. I didn't believe him. But right now we are starting to approach this end game where the Federal Reserve is going to use this crisis to start buying up assets. And so what I mean by assets is they're going to start coming in and buying stocks. They're going to start coming in and buying corporate bonds, at least in my opinion. And that's not even just my opinion. The Fed president, Boston Fed President Rosengren came out last week and said that the Federal Reserve should start looking into buying stocks. The Bank of Japan is already buying stocks. And so absent all this manipulation, we would have seen a drastically different picture in the markets the past several years. If we go back to the Federal Reserve Economic Database and look at the Fed's balance sheet, what happened over here is right around this time when you start seeing the Federal Reserve's balance sheet level off, that's when the Bank of Japan started their program. That's when the European Central Bank started their program. So what this was, it was like kind of like a hot potato where they were just throwing around, okay, it's your turn to stimulate. Oh no, now it's your turn to stimulate. And so they kept passing around this hot potato. And now we're at the point, Luke, where we're in such a calamity that, everyone wanted to pretend that everything was going great. But if it was going great, why do we have to have $500 billion in liquidity every single day? And so this kicked off September 17th of last year, when the repo rates shot up to over 10% overnight. And that was a Armageddon type moment, but the Federal Reserve came in, rescued the day, and I'll say the rescue in air quotes, and they absolutely bailed out the big banks. And this is a stealth bailout of the banks. The other thing that's going on is that the Federal Reserve is monetizing the debt. So what happens is you've got the big mega banks like Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, all those too big to fail banks. And what they do is they end up buying treasuries from the Treasury Department. And then when those treasuries settle 1 or 2 days later, then what the Fed does is they come in and then they buy that debt. And so they buy it for a little bit more money. So that right there is a secret stealth bailout of the banks. And let me also remind you, this excess liquidity going into the system far exceeds what was going on in 2008. The TARP bailouts was $700 billion. We also know that there was a secret program that was about $16 trillion that we were able to find out from a FOIA request. So the $700 billion was more or less just a smokescreen for the other secret $16 trillion. But the thing is, these central banks are crazy, Luke. They're using this as an excuse. It's not just the Fed. It's the Bank of Japan. It's the European Central Bank. It's the Bank of International Settlements. It sits above everything else, which you can go. I was on the BIS.org website the other day, and they were talking about how central bank digital currencies are something they're looking at. So I'm thinking they're going to use this crisis to then get people scared of using cash. We see in Italy right now that with a lot of Italians having to stay home, that Italians are actually some of the least literate people when it comes to technology. I'm Italian, so I mean, I'm not like I'm making fun of Italians over here, but the amount of Italians in Italy that knew how to use the internet was pretty pathetic. But now this is getting them to use, the internet more, to get more comfortable going digital. And so the end game is to try to have a digital currency that eventually is tied into some sort of social engineering, what they have in China, and then also use this control grid that they're using to put in place because of all the coronavirus fears to then, eventually get us into this checkmate. And to me, that's got to be one of the biggest, stories in the world. And I just hope that people aren't losing the forest for the trees when they see what's going on, Luke.
Well, let's be honest here. I don't see things getting better from this particular point, especially with the U.S. military launching new aggressive operations, more massive military drills, them having and distributing $1.5 trillion to Wall Street, but they can't even test people correctly. I mean, one thing we have to understand here by looking at all of this, a lot of this was avoidable. A lot of other countries are dealing with this problem a lot better. We're not. And we have to really now take a look at Italy to see if Italy will break down. There's going to be more disruptions. With more disruptions, there's going to be more economic ramifications because of that. There's no denying it. And we're looking at a situation that's going to be unfolding for what many people say is about 6 months now. So it's not going to be good. And I think everyone's going to be at a loss. And I think it's just saving yourself, making sure you don't lose everything in one basket. That's where I'm at right now. That's all I have to say. Anything else you want to finish off on before we end this video?
Yeah, Tim? The last thing I want to say is that there's a big distinction. The words economy and stock market should not be used interchangeably. And so what the powers that be want you to think is that those words are interchangeable. And so I would not put it past them to do whatever it takes, which is something Mario Draghi, the former president of the European Central Bank, famously said in 2014, that they were going to do whatever it takes. Now I've got Mnuchin saying unlimited liquidity. And so for me, this is sort of like that jump the shark moment. And we could see the Fed coming in buying stocks, and we could see the stock market going hyperbolic. Again, not financial advice, but this is what happens in the late stages of this game, is that they want to play this confidence game. And so people see the stock market going up, so they think everything is great. But the thing is, everything isn't great. And you guys can go check out my presentation I gave from Anarchapulco just a month ago, February 11th, where I detail in great detail, PowerPoint, whole presentation on everything, as much as I could fit in half an hour, what was going wrong in America, and then how people could play that from an investment standpoint. So highly recommend people check that out. But, to me, it's a very fluid situation. Just because we're saying things could get a lot worse, I'm not necessarily talking about the stock market. I'm talking about just for average general life in public. And I hope you guys know what's going on. I hope you guys have been prepared. And we're just going to keep bringing you all the news as we see it, Luke.
Definitely stay smart, stay safe, have your head on the swivel, and expect everything, because right now the new norm is just everything being unexpected. But again, prepare as much as you can. That's the most advice that we could give out there. We've been telling people about this since the end of January. Specifically on We Are Change. You look at our playlist. We've been documenting the coronavirus and telling you where it's most likely going to be headed, and it's been heading there. Plus then some. Seriously, Stay safe out there. Prepare. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned for more here on Change the News channel.